Something extraordinary just happened inside the Catholic Church, and it could change the entire direction of American foreign policy. Right now, as you are watching this,
My fellow
a group
Americans,
of the
we are at
most
a pivotal
powerful
moment in our
Catholic
nation's
bishops
history.
in the United
We must
States
confront these
has
challenges
broken
with
ranks
strength
with
and
one of the
unity.
most
Together
influential
we will
men
build
in
a
Washington.
stronger, more
They
prosperous
are standing
future.
firmly,
Let
publicly,
us seek
and
peace and
boldly
understanding.
behind the brand new
Peace
Pope,
sounds good, but we need real
Leo
solutions.
XIV,
Peace is the path
on one
to
of the most
solutions.
dangerous issues of our
We'll
time.
see about that.
Iran, war, and the future of millions of lives, and the man they are pushing back against? Vice President JD Vance. Stay with me, because this story goes so much deeper than a simple church versus government argument. This is about power, conscience, faith, and whether America is about to make a decision that cannot be undone. You are watching Federal Alert, and this is the story that every American needs to hear right now. Before we go any further, if you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now and smash the like button. We cover the stories that the mainstream media either buries or spins, and we do it straight. No fluff, no agenda, just the truth. Now let us get into this. To understand why this moment is so significant, we need to go back just a few weeks. The Catholic Church just elected a new pope, Pope Leo XIV. And from the very first days of his papacy, he has made one thing absolutely crystal clear. He does not want war with Iran. He has spoken about it with a kind of urgency and moral directness that has stunned both the religious and political worlds. He has used the full weight of his office, the highest office in the Catholic Church, an institution that represents over 1 billion people on this planet, to send a message. Diplomacy, dialogue, peace. That is the path. Not bombs, not military. Escalation. Not another war in the Middle East that will send American sons and daughters into harm's way and destabilize an already burning region. Now, here is where it gets political. Here is where it gets personal. And here is where it gets very, very complicated for the Republican Party and the current administration. JD Vance is a Catholic. He converted to Catholicism in 2019. He has spoken publicly and proudly about how his faith shapes his worldview and his politics. He has presented himself as a man guided by Catholic values. So when the Pope himself, the leader of the entire Catholic faith, stands up and says war with Iran is not the answer, you might expect Vance to pause. You might expect him to reflect. You might expect him to at least acknowledge the spiritual weight of what the head of his church is saying. That is not what happened. Vance made remarks that essentially dismissed or minimized the Pope's stance. He suggested, in the way that politicians often do when they want to disagree without fully disagreeing, that the Pope does not fully understand the geopolitical realities, that the situation with Iran is more complex than a simple moral call for peace, that America's security interests must come first. And he wrapped all of this in the kind of language that sounds reasonable on the surface, but is actually deeply dismissive of the Church's moral authority on matters of war and peace. And the bishops? They were not having it. This is Federal Alert, and what happened next is something that historians are going to be writing about for years. A significant coalition of American Catholic bishops released statements, held press conferences, and in some cases gave direct interviews to major outlets, all saying the same thing. They are with the Pope. They support his position on Iran. They believe that the path to peace must be pursued with every ounce of diplomatic energy the United States has before a single military option is even placed on the table, and several of them were notably pointed in their language about Vance's remarks. They were not rude. Bishops are not rude men. But they were firm, and in the carefully measured world of Catholic Church communication, firm is about as strong as it gets. One bishop, speaking on behalf of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, said that the Pope's call for restraint is not a political opinion. It is a moral imperative rooted in the Church's long-standing teaching on just war theory. And under just war theory, a doctrine the Catholic Church has held and taught for over 1,500 years, A war is only morally justifiable if it meets a very specific set of criteria. The threat must be grave, certain, and imminent. Every peaceful alternative must have been exhausted. The harm caused by the war must not be greater than the harm being prevented. And there must be a reasonable chance of success. According to the bishops, the current situation with Iran does not meet these criteria, not even close. Now let us talk about who Pope Leo XIV actually is, because if you have been following Federal Alert for a while, you know we always go deeper than the headline. This pope is not a naive man. He is not someone who stumbled into the papacy without understanding the brutal complexity of global politics. He was the prefect of the dicastery for bishops, one of the most powerful administrative positions in the Vatican. He has spent decades navigating the intersection of faith, politics, and global power. He understands Iran. He understands the nuclear question. He understands what American military engagement in the Middle East has looked like, historically. And despite all of that knowledge, or perhaps because of all of that knowledge, he is saying, do not go to war. That is not a position born from ignorance. That is a position born from the deepest kind of moral and strategic conviction. And here is the thing that should make every American sit up straight in their chair. Regardless of whether they are Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, Muslim, or have no faith at all, when the Pope says something like this, he is not just speaking to Catholics. The Pope is one of the most recognized moral voices on the planet. He speaks to heads of state. He speaks to the United Nations. His words land in Tehran and in Tel Aviv and in Beijing and in Moscow. When the Pope says America should not go to war with Iran, that message echoes through every diplomatic corridor on Earth. And when a sitting American vice president essentially shrugs that off, that also echoes, and not in a good way. We are at Federal Alert keeping a very close eye on how this is playing out inside the Republican Party, because the fracture lines here are fascinating and they are deep. The Republican Party has, for decades, cultivated a very close relationship with Catholic voters. Catholics are not a monolithic bloc. They vote both Democrat and Republican in significant numbers. But conservative Catholics have been a crucial part of the Republican coalition. These are voters who care deeply about what the Church says. These are voters who take their faith seriously. And now the Church, at its highest level, from the Pope down through the American bishops, is saying something that directly contradicts the foreign policy direction of the Republican administration. That is a tension that cannot simply be explained away or managed with a few talking points. Think about what Vance is dealing with right now. He is a convert who has spoken about his faith as transformative. He is someone who has built part of his political identity around being a serious Catholic intellectual. He has cited Catholic thinkers, Catholic social teaching, Catholic natural law tradition. And now the Pope and the bishops are publicly, clearly, and firmly on the other side of one of the most consequential foreign policy questions of the decade. There is no elegant way out of that. Either you say the Pope is wrong, which is a statement no Catholic politician wants to make publicly, or you acknowledge the tension and wrestle with it openly, which Vance has not done. Instead, his approach has been to minimize it, to redirect, to talk about strategic necessity and American interests, as though those things exist in a separate universe from moral responsibility. And the bishops are not letting that slide. Now let us talk about Iran itself, because context matters enormously here, and Federal Alert always gives you the full picture. Iran is not a simple adversary. The Iranian government is a theocratic regime with a deeply complicated internal political landscape. There are hardliners who genuinely want to see America fail. There are pragmatists who understand that the Iranian economy has been devastated by decades of sanctions and who would prefer a negotiated path. There are young people in Iran, tens of millions of them, who have more in common with young Americans than most people realize. They watch the same movies. They dream of the same kinds of lives. They do not want war either. The nuclear question is real, and it is serious. No serious person denies that a nuclear-armed Iran would change the strategic calculus of the entire region. But the question is not whether that concern is valid. The question is whether military action is the right response to that concern, and whether the risks of military action, including the almost certain expansion of the conflict across the region, the potential for tens of thousands of casualties, the economic shock waves, and the long-term destabilization that would follow, are truly being weighed against the risks of continued diplomacy. The Pope thinks they are not. The bishops agree, and a growing number of voices inside and outside the foreign policy establishment are raising the same questions. Let us come back to the bishops for a moment, because their intervention here is not just morally significant. It is politically significant in a way that Vance and the administration should be taking very seriously. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops has enormous reach. They have relationships with communities in every single state. They operate hospitals, schools, charities, and social service organizations that touch the lives of millions of Americans every single day. When they speak, they are not speaking to an abstract audience. They are speaking to real people in real communities who trust them and listen to them. And right now, those bishops are saying, in plain, clear language, that supporting a war with Iran is not consistent with Catholic moral teaching. That is a significant political problem for any Republican politician who depends on Catholic voters to win elections. And JD Vance, who is positioning himself as a future political force in the Republican Party, potentially beyond just the vice presidency, has to be thinking about what this means for his long-term political identity. You cannot build a Catholic political brand and then have the Pope and the bishops publicly push back on your foreign policy position without that leaving a mark. Here at Federal Alert, we want to be fair and honest about this, so let us also present the other side of this argument. There are serious people, serious Catholic thinkers included, who argue that the just war tradition actually supports a firm stance against Iran. They argue that the threat from a nuclear-armed Iran is not just speculative, but is an imminent danger to American allies, particularly Israel, and that allowing Iran to reach nuclear capability would be a catastrophic failure of moral responsibility. They argue that the Pope, operating from the Vatican, may not have full visibility into the intelligence picture that American policymakers are working with. They argue that peace is not always achievable through dialogue alone, and that sometimes a credible military threat is precisely what creates the conditions for genuine diplomacy. These are not crazy arguments. They are made by thoughtful people. And the debate within the Church itself about how just war theory applies to this specific situation is real and ongoing. But here is the thing. Even if you accept all of those arguments, the fact remains that the Pope and the bishops have spoken, and the fact that a sitting vice president has chosen to essentially wave that off rather than engage with it seriously, that is what is drawing fire. It is not just about the policy. It is about respect. It is about whether the Church's voice matters in the policy conversation, and the bishops are saying, loudly and clearly, that it does. This is Federal Alert, and we need to talk about the broader implications of this moment because this is not just a one-week news story. This is the beginning of something that could have lasting consequences for American politics, American foreign policy, and the relationship between the Catholic Church and the Republican Party. The last time the Catholic Church took a strong public stance against American military action was in the lead-up to the Iraq War in 2003. Pope John Paul II spoke against it. The American bishops largely echoed his concerns, and the Bush administration, also full of prominent Catholic figures, went to war anyway. We all know how that turned out. The war in Iraq became one of the defining failures of American foreign policy in the modern era. Thousands of American troops killed, hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians dead. A region destabilized in ways that are still reverberating today. The rise of ISIS, the empowerment of Iran itself, the destruction of Christian communities in Iraq that had existed for 2,000 years. Looking back, those who warned against the war including the Pope and the bishops, look a lot wiser than those who pushed for it. Is history about to repeat itself? Are we standing at another one of those moments where the church is saying, "Wait, slow down. Think about this more carefully," and the political establishment is preparing to charge ahead anyway? The bishops who are speaking out right now seem to believe that we are, and they are determined not to be silent about it. There is also something happening here that goes beyond just the Iran question. There is a deeper struggle over the soul of American Catholicism playing out in public. On one side, you have a traditionalist, nationalist Catholic movement that has become deeply intertwined with the MAGA political project. This movement tends to downplay or reinterpret church teaching on issues like war, immigration, and care for the poor in ways that align with right-wing politics. On the other side, you have the institutional church, the bishops, the Vatican, the Pope himself, which has consistently insisted that Catholic teaching cannot be selectively applied. You cannot claim the label of faithful Catholic while ignoring what the Church says about refugees, about poverty, about the death penalty, and about war. You do not get to pick the parts that are politically convenient and throw out the rest. JD Vance has, whether intentionally or not, stepped right into the middle of this fight. And the bishops who are rallying around Pope Leo are not just making a statement about Iran. They are making a statement about who gets to define what it means to be Catholic in America. And right now they are saying it is not the politicians. It is the church. Federal Alert has been watching this develop, and here is what we think you need to watch for in the coming days and weeks. Pay attention to how many more bishops join this chorus. The initial statements came from a significant group, but if the full conference of Catholic bishops moves toward a formal collective statement on Iran, that would be an extraordinary moment. Pay attention to how Catholic media responds. Outlets like America Magazine, the National Catholic Reporter, and even more conservative publications like EWTN and the National Catholic Register are going to be covering this intensively, and the editorial positions they take will tell you a lot about how the fault lines in American Catholicism are shifting. Pay attention to what Catholic politicians in the House and Senate do. There are dozens of Catholic members of Congress on both sides of the aisle. Do they back Vance? Do they back the bishops? Do they try to stay quiet and hope nobody notices? And most importantly, pay attention to whether the administration changes its tone on Iran in any way. Because if the diplomatic pressure, combined with the church's moral pressure, actually slows the march toward military confrontation, that will be one of the most remarkable examples of religious institutions influencing American foreign policy that we have seen in a generation. We also want to talk about what this means for ordinary Americans who are paying attention. If you are Catholic, this is a moment that calls for genuine reflection. The leader of your faith and the bishops of your country are speaking with unusual unanimity and unusual urgency on a question of war and peace. That deserves more than a dismissive shrug. If you are not Catholic, this still matters to you. Because a war with Iran would not be a war that only affects Catholics or only affects the people who supported it. It would affect every American. The economic consequences alone, the impact on oil prices, on global financial markets, on the cost of goods right here at home, would be felt in every household in this country. And the human cost, the lives of American service members, the lives of Iranian civilians, the potential for the conflict to spread, that cost would be paid by people who had no vote in the decision. This is Federal Alert, and this is exactly the kind of story we exist to cover. The intersections of power and conscience. The moments when institutions that rarely speak up decide they cannot stay silent anymore. The fault lines inside American politics that the mainstream media smooths over and simplifies because the reality is too messy and too complicated for a 30-second segment. We do not do that here. We go deep. We stay with the story. And we trust that you, our audience, are smart enough and serious enough to handle the full picture. Let us bring this home now. Here is where things stand as of today. Pope Leo XIV has staked out a clear, public, unambiguous position against military escalation with Iran. He has used the moral authority of the papacy, an institution with 2,000 years of history and over 1 billion followers worldwide, to say that this path leads somewhere dark and dangerous. The American bishops are standing with him. They are not whispering this in private correspondence. They are saying it publicly, in press statements and media interviews, directed at the political class in Washington. JD Vance has responded in a way that has drawn criticism not just from the bishops, but from Catholic commentators and thinkers across the theological spectrum. The administration has not significantly shifted its stance. The pressure is building. The stakes could not be higher. And in the middle of all of this, here at Federal Alert, we are going to keep bringing you the full story. Not the sound bites, not the spin, not the version that fits neatly into any particular political box, the real story. Because that is what you deserve. That is what this country needs. And that is what we are here to do. If this video gave you something to think about, and we believe it did, do us a favor right now. Drop your thoughts in the comment section below. We genuinely want to know what you think about this. Do you think the bishops are right to speak out? Do you think Vance has a legitimate point about security concerns? Do you think the church should be weighing in on foreign policy questions at all? Whatever your view, we want to hear it. The comment section on Federal Alert is one of the most thoughtful places on this platform, and that is because of you. So get in there, share your perspective, and let us have the conversation that Washington is apparently not willing to have. And if you know someone, a friend, a family member, a coworker, who needs to hear this story, share this video with them right now, not tomorrow, right now. Because the decisions being made in Washington about Iran are not going to wait for the news cycle to catch up. They are happening in real time, and the more people who understand what is at stake morally, politically, spiritually, and strategically, the better equipped we are as a country to hold our leaders accountable. Share this video, start the conversation. That is how change actually happens. This is Federal Alert. Stay alert, stay informed, and we will see you in the next one.